A cold wind cut through the night as a young black boy stood alone under a flickering streetlight. His clothes were torn, his stomach empty, and the voices around him whispered the same cruel words, "You will never be more than this." Every step he took on the cracked pavement echoed his struggle. The world had already written his ending, a life of failure and forgotten dreams. Yet inside his chest burned a fire no storm could kill. He had no money, no guidance, no power, but he carried something greater: courage. Each tear that fell from his eyes was a silent promise to fight back. He asked himself, "Is this really my destiny, or can I write a new one?" The answer was waiting beyond the darkness, but only if he dared to push forward. What happens when a boy refuses to accept the chains around him? He was born into a world where the odds were stacked against him before he even took his first breath. His neighborhood was filled with broken houses, shattered dreams, and streets that carried more pain than hope. Teachers told him he was too slow, neighbors believed he would never rise, and even friends abandoned him when survival got harder. But inside his heart lived a silent strength, a voice that whispered louder than all the noise around him. Every sunrise brought him new battles, hunger, rejection, and fear, but none of them could destroy the flame that pushed him forward. This is not just the story of a boy fighting against poverty, racism, and doubt. This is the story of how determination turned scars into strength and weakness into power. His journey was not about surviving the world. It was about transforming it with relentless courage and unshakable belief. His earliest memories were not filled with laughter or warmth but with the sound of sirens screaming through the night and the rumble of empty stomachs echoing louder than any lullaby. The walls of his small home carried cracks that matched the cracks in his life, and every corner reminded him of what was missing: a father who never stayed, a mother who worked until her body broke, and a future that seemed impossible. Kids around him found joy in simple games, but he was forced to grow up faster, learning how to hide hunger behind silence and how to mask fear behind forced courage. At school he was treated as invisible, another face in the crowd, another name teachers expected to fail. He wanted to believe in something greater, but reality whispered daily that dreams were luxuries for other people, not for him. Nights were the hardest. Darkness brought questions he could not answer. Why was he born into struggle? Why did life punish him before he had a chance to stand? Many times he felt ready to surrender, to accept that his existence would never matter, but even in those moments a stubborn spark remained. It was small, almost too faint to notice, yet powerful enough to keep him breathing, powerful enough to keep him searching for a reason not to quit. That spark would become the seed of something extraordinary, though he did not know it yet. At that time, all he knew was pain, but deep down he was learning something greater than comfort. He was learning how to survive in a world designed to break him. One cold morning he walked through the same broken streets, his head heavy with doubt, when something unusual happened. A worn-out book lay on the sidewalk, pages torn, cover faded, yet it called to him in a way he could not explain. He picked it up and opened it, and inside were words about people who had risen from nothing to change the world. Every sentence hit him like a flame to dry wood, igniting the small spark already inside his heart. For the first time, he felt the possibility of another life, a life built by effort, not fate. That day he made a silent vow. No matter how much pain he faced, he would never let despair decide his future. He began waking earlier than others, pushing his tired body to work, read, and learn. Even when his stomach screamed for food, his mind focused on growth. People laughed at his sudden discipline, mocking him for dreaming too big, but their voices no longer had power. At night, while others slept, he whispered promises to himself, promises that one day he would escape the chains around him. Each failure became a lesson, each insult became fuel, and every moment of weakness became a reminder to stand stronger. It was not an easy road, and doubt returned often, but something inside him had shifted forever. He had discovered that the true strength of a man is not measured by where he starts but by how fiercely he refuses to stop. That spark, born from a torn book and a broken street, became the light guiding him through the darkest nights. The spark inside him gave birth to hope, but hope alone was not enough. When he tried to join a sports team, the coach told him he was too weak. When he applied for part-time jobs, employers shook their heads, saying he was too young or too inexperienced. Each rejection cut into his heart like a blade, reminding him of the harsh reality that the world was not ready to open doors for someone like him. Still, he refused to stop knocking. He studied late into the night, memorizing lessons under a broken lamp, but his grades remained low. Teachers doubted his effort, classmates laughed at his attempts, and even neighbors warned him that hard work could never erase the label society had placed on him. His failures piled up like heavy stones on his back, yet every fall taught him something new. He learned how to stand faster after being pushed down, how to use criticism as energy, and how to sharpen his mind through mistakes. The pain of disappointment was unbearable at times, but it became the fuel for his determination. He began to see failure not as the end of his path but as the training ground for his courage. Each closed door forced him to search for another, and each humiliation gave him a reason to fight harder. Sometimes he wanted to scream, sometimes he wanted to break, but in those darkest moments he reminded himself of the vow he made. He was not just fighting for success, he was fighting for survival, for dignity, for proof that destiny could be rewritten. And though he was still far from victory, every failure was carving him into someone stronger, someone unstoppable, someone ready for the moment when the world could no longer deny his worth. That he had fallen so many times that even the ground seemed to recognize his weight, yet one moment changed everything. It was a small chance, a scholarship program announced at school, one that no one believed he could win. His classmates laughed when he picked up the application, teachers shook their heads, and even his mother warned him not to get his hopes too high. But this time he felt something different, a voice inside whispering that this was his chance to break the cycle. He poured every ounce of effort into preparing, reading every page, writing every word with care, practicing his answers until his voice cracked. Nights disappeared into mornings, but he refused to rest. On the day of the interview, his hands trembled, his heart pounded, and fear screamed louder than ever, yet he walked into that room with courage stitched to every step. The judges looked at him with doubt, expecting little, but he spoke with a fire that came from years of hunger, rejection, and pain. He told them about his struggles, his lessons, and his promise never to surrender. His words were not polished, but they were real, and that truth carried more weight than perfect grammar ever could. Weeks later, a letter arrived. His fingers shook as he tore it open, and for a moment his eyes refused to believe what they saw. He had been chosen. That single word, congratulations, was more than a victory. It was proof that the boy everyone doubted had broken through. Tears filled his eyes, but they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of transformation, proof that failure had not destroyed him but had prepared him for this very moment. The turning point had come, and from here, his story would never be the same again. Winning the scholarship was only the beginning. The real battle started when he stepped into a new world filled with people who had more money, better clothes, and endless support from their families. He carried none of that. What he carried instead was pressure, responsibility, and a heart determined to never waste the chance he had earned. Every morning he woke before sunrise, forcing his tired body to study while others still slept. He skipped meals so he could buy books, walked miles because bus fare was too expensive, and spent nights in libraries where silence became his closest friend. Nobody saw him fight back tears when he had to choose between food and notebooks. Nobody noticed the weight of loneliness when classmates avoided him because he looked different, spoke differently, and came from a place they could never imagine. Behind every achievement, there was a hidden sacrifice. He gave up sleep, comfort, and even friendships because distraction was something he could no longer afford. His mother worried about his health, begging him to rest, but he kept reminding himself of the vow he had made under the streetlight long ago. Each sacrifice was painful, yet each one was proof that his dream mattered more than his comfort. There were nights when he collapsed from exhaustion, hands trembling over pages blurred by tired eyes, but instead of quitting, he whispered to himself, "Keep going." The world clapped for his victories, but no one saw the scars behind them. They saw results, not the hunger, not the loneliness, not the sacrifices that carved him into steel. He was building a future brick by brick, laying it down with sweat, tears, and relentless effort. And though no spotlight shone on his struggle, he knew one day the sacrifices that nearly broke him would become the foundation that lifted him higher than anyone ever expected. His sacrifices piled higher than mountains, but eventually they began to open doors he once thought were locked forever. One evening, while others celebrated small wins, he stood on a stage, holding a certificate that carried his name. It was not just paper. It was a weapon that shattered the chains of doubt wrapped around him since childhood. The boy who was once ignored now had a spotlight burning on his face, and the same voices that had once mocked him sat silent in disbelief. But this victory was not about proving them wrong. It was about proving himself right. The years of hunger, sleepless nights, and silent tears had led to this moment, and he knew it was only the beginning. His success was not sudden. It was built through every failure that tried to break him, through every sacrifice nobody else had witnessed. Now he was no longer the weak child people dismissed. He had become a force strong enough to bend destiny. Standing tall, he realized that his battle had never truly been with poverty, racism, or rejection. His greatest battle had been with fear, and for the first time, fear bowed its head before him. He had broken free not because life grew easier, but because he had grown stronger. The chains of doubt that once tied him to hopeless streets now lay shattered at his feet. His community, once skeptical, began to see him as a symbol of possibility. Children who had stopped dreaming looked at him and believed again. He understood that his story was no longer his alone. It was a torch meant to light the path for others trapped in the same darkness. And as he looked toward the horizon, he knew this was not the end of his journey but the true beginning of a life rewritten through relentless courage. With every milestone he achieved, he realized his journey was no longer about himself alone. The boy who once walked hungry streets now carried a message that could ignite hope in others. He returned to his neighborhood, not with riches, but with determination to show that courage and effort could rewrite destinies. Children who had stopped dreaming watched him, their eyes wide with curiosity and belief. He spoke to them about failure, sacrifice, and persistence, sharing the lessons that had been carved into his soul. Parents who once shook their heads at his ambitions now nodded in admiration, understanding that he had become proof that circumstances do not define a person. The world began to notice. Invitations arrived for talks, interviews, and programs, but he remained grounded, always remembering the streetlights, the hunger, and the nights spent alone with his dreams. Every word he spoke carried the weight of experience, inspiring people to confront their own fears and push beyond limits. His story became a symbol, a living example that courage is contagious and determination unstoppable. Even strangers felt its power, finding motivation in his rise from invisibility to influence. Yet he never stopped learning, never stopped striving, and never stopped showing others that the path to greatness is built on sweat, tears, and relentless belief. The boy who was once labeled as nothing had now become a beacon of hope, proving that one life's courage could touch countless others. From the shadows of hardship, he had emerged not just as a survivor, but as a leader, a teacher, and a reminder that destiny is not given, it is earned. And as he looked into the eager faces before him, he understood that the legacy he was creating was far greater than any award or title. It was the awakening of countless hearts ready to fight for their dreams. He had walked through fire, faced hunger, rejection, and nights filled with tears, yet he stood taller than ever, a testament to courage and relentless will. Every scar, every sleepless night, every whispered doubt had forged him into someone unbreakable, someone who refused to let the world define his worth. He had not just survived, he had transformed his pain into power, his struggles into lessons, and his failures into stepping stones. Now, as he looked back on the streets that once held him down, he realized those hardships had been the blueprint for his greatness. His journey was no longer only his own. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt defeated, unseen, or powerless. This was proof that destiny is not handed out. It is written by those brave enough to fight, to sacrifice, and to believe. And in his rise, the world saw that even the smallest spark, nurtured with courage, could ignite a light bright enough to change everything.